Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Before I proceed to discuss the subject matter for today, gusto ko pong sabihin sa lahat na ito pong topic natin is the most asked question nitong pandemic, lalo na po nung kasagsagan ng COVID. At namili po kami sa mga scenarios at ito po ang napili namin. Okay? Simulan na po natin. And this might take a bit longer. That would be more than 10 minutes. Anyway, ang topic po is floating status with a question mark. Release and let go, its implications. In a while, I'm going to explain why with a question mark and why release and let go. Ito po yung scenario. The management has placed a number of employees on a floating status beyond the 6-month period, while the rest of the employees were being instructed to remain. Those employees that were being placed on a floating status were not given the chance to be transferred to another account or line of business, despite that the company is externally hiring for those accounts or line of business. No separation pay was being discussed or mentioned by the said employer. Ang tanong, is the act of the management valid under the labor code? Is floating status applicable on this scenario? I'm going to give you the partial answer, and the further explanation will be given to you in a while. The act of the management or employer is illegal. Why? Because the employer or management cannot just simply say that they have the right to management prerogative without considering the seniority rights of the employees and the negative impact on the employee's mental health. If the management prerogative right is being used to defeat or circumvent the rights of the employees under a valid law or agreement, such cannot be upheld. Ang ibig sabihin po niyan is ang employer or mga employers or company has an inherent right, the right to management prerogative to regulate all aspects of employment. They also have that discretion on how to manage their business. However, the right to management prerogative is not absolute. If that right is being used abusively by the employer to the prejudice of the rights of the employees, hindi po yan kakampihan ng korte natin. Okay, let us check on the labor code and the DOLE rule and apply this scenario. Basahin ko na lang po yung labor code and the DOLE rule for you, just to make sure that I wouldn't miss anything. Okay. According to Article 301 of the Labor Code of the Philippines, for the floating status to be lawful, the following requisites must be present. So, kailangan itong mga requisites na to present, not only one requisite, all requisites. The first is there must be presence of temporary layoff due to temporary suspension of business or cessation of business. Second condition, the employer must notify the employee or the employees and DOLE in writing at least 30 days in advance of the start of the layoff period or floating status. Failure to do so makes the temporary layoff void and illegal and leaves the employer open to complaint and sanction. So, ang ibig po sabihin yan, kailangan meron proof o meron temporary layoff nangyayari dahil sa temporary suspension of business or shutdown yung business. The third condition is the layoff must last for no more than 6 months or 180 days, by which time the employer must reinstate the employee in his former position without loss of seniority rights. If the employee indicates his or her desire to resume work not later than 1 month from the resumption of the operations of the business of the employer, or offer retrenchment if the position is no longer available. Okay? So the employer must notify the employees and DOLE 30 days in advance bago po mag-start ang kanilang floating status or temporary layoff. The layoff must not be more than 6 months or 180 days. So by which time within the 6-month period, the employer must reinstate the employee in his or her former position without loss of seniority rights. Pero mangyayari lang po yung reinstatement ng employee kung si employee naman ay magpakita ng desire or willingness to resume work, and that should be done no more than 1 month from the resumption of the business ng employer. And the fourth condition is the bona fide or bona fide suspension of operations must be proved. The employer must be able to clearly and convincingly show the economic justification for the temporary closure. So kailangan sa employer mag-prove. He should prove that his or her business is undergoing economic problem or financial problem, kaya meron silang temporary closure, kaya merong temporary suspension and nangyari yung floating. DOLE or Department of Labor and Employment issued a department order number 215 dated October 23, 2020, extending the 6 months to another 6 months, so making it 1 year. But this can only be permitted kung ang following conditions are met. Okay, so these are the following conditions. This should be met bago ma-permit o bago si employer be permitted to extend the 6 months. The first condition, there should be a mutual agreement between the employer and employee through the union, if any, or with the assistance of the Department of Labor and in Employment or DOLE. So, kailangan may mutual agreement. Hindi pwedeng pilitin si employee. Kasi kapag pinil si employee, hindi po pwede yan extension. Second, good faith must be present in both employer and employee for the purpose of said extension. So, kailangan may good faith. Hindi pwede po magsinungaling si employee o napilitan o sasabihin, yes, gusto ko po, pero actually, ayaw niya. So, there's no good faith din niya on the part of the employee. Kasi, natatakot lang kay employer. No. The employee should have that good faith. Kailangan niya sabihin, hindi po ako pumapayag. Okay? Number 3, or the third condition, the employer should report the extension of suspension of employment to the Department of Labor and Employment at least 10 days prior to the effectivity thereof. So, kailangan merong report ng extension sa DOLE or Department of Labor and Employment at least 10 days bago po mag-start ang floating status or temporary layoff or temporary suspension of business. And the last condition is the extension of suspension of employment shall not affect the right of the employees to separation pay. And the first 6 months of suspension of employment shall be included in the computation of the employee's separation pay. So this is self-explanatory. Kailangan daw hindi affected o masakasaan yung right to separation pay because entitled po si employee dyan. The first 6 months is included sa computation. Going back to our scenario and applying the said labor code and DOLE rule. Do you think the management was able to meet the conditions of DOLE rule? And were the requisites sa labor code present? No. Hindi po na-meet ni employer. Because temporary suspension of business, there's no suspension or temporary suspension or cessation of business to speak of in this scenario. Dahil meron po mga naiwan ng mga empleyado pa. And in fact, the company is still hiring externally para sa ibang mga line of business or accounts. And those employees that have been placed on floating status, they should have been prioritized. Kailangan na-transfer sila doon sa mga available na mga accounts. There was no any communication or proper communication or documentation, so it follows there's no mutual agreement at all. So, bad faith is present. Okay? And in fact, the employer failed to clearly and convincingly show na ang kanyang business is encountering difficulty economically and financially. Nothing at all. Okay? And separation pay was not even being paid. So, between retrenchment and redundancy, kailangan explain yan ni employer. So, I think floating status is not applicable on this. Because probably redundancy should be paid. But yet, it's up to the employer to prove that their business is undergoing financial losses or financial problem. Kaya sila nagkakaroon ng retrenchment or temporary suspension of business, or kaya nangyari yung layoff. Why release and let go? Normally, the employees in this case or scenario, ang kawawa. They are the ones that suffer the most. Dahil po, ang kanilang sweldo, salary or wages, are their bread and butter to have a better life. Kapag nakikita po nila ang kanilang pamilya ay nagugutom at nahihirapan, at sila po ay naka-floating dahil wala silang sweldo na receive po dyan, tapos na-extend pa, do you think the employees would stay longer? No. The normal reaction is to resign. Dahil why would they be staying longer to such a stressful working environment na wala naman pong proper communication? Bakit po sila nalagay sa floating status? Okay? So, there is a circumvention of rights in this scenario, which is a violation of the labor code. So, ang conclusion po dito, the act of the management tantamounts to constructive dismissal. According to law, ang constructive dismissal would only be there or would only be present kapag may involuntary resignation. Okay? Ang nangyari po dito sa scenario, there was a voluntary resignation. But, technically, that is involuntary. Why? Dahil napilitan po ang mga empleyado mag-resign. Dahil sa walang sistemang maganda ang company. They were not being fully informed of what's going on with their employment or status of employment. They have the rights. The employees have the right to be informed. But, wala po. Kasi ang mga empleyado, kapag po yung kanilang sweldo na siya pong kanilang kinukuhanan to sustain and to have a better life, if that part is being taken away from them, they would rather leave the company. So, ganun po ang nangyari dito. Yung mga ibang empleyado po nag-resign. They voluntarily resign. And that I would say is technically involuntary because napilitan nga po sila mag-resign. And and the further explanation to that involuntary resignation has resulted to involuntary resignation despite voluntary. Technically, it's involuntary. Dahil staying in that employment, continued employment rather, becomes impossible. Meaning to say, pag nandun ka sa company yon, do you think you will be transferred or reinstated or i-reassign ka na lang sa ibang account? Kung meron pong nangyaring ganyan, dapat it was done earlier. Dahil po ang company is still hiring externally. May bad faith po dito. It's tainted with bad faith. So, ang resolution po dito, file a complaint sa NLRC. And damages can even be sought. Seek assistance kay DOLE o Department of Labor and Employment. Meron po akong nilagay dyan na sa description a decided case ng Supreme Court, and that is applicable to our scenario today. Pag may time po kayo, you can read it because that is a company, that is a TELUS case versus an employee of them. Basahin niyo po and para po at least maliwanagan kayo about labor, about the ruling or about the law on floating status. So sana po na meron kayong natutunan sa ating discussion today, and umabot po tayo na more than 10 minutes. And this video our video will be twice or 3 times in a week. So maraming salamat po for watching. Please subscribe or please share, like, and follow. Maraming salamat po and you have a great day.